exist and the Big Bang can exist as one. You can believe in a God and you can believe in the Big Bang. You can say that the way that the religious texts speak are descriptive and they're not literal and they're describing that process. You can argue that. But what I would say is I don't see any evidence for God. I don't see any evidence for God, and I don't see any evidence for there not being God. I can't prove a negative. And you're asking me to prove a negative, and that's not physically possible.
Yeah, it is.
Prove that doesn't exist.
Of course, we prove negative all the time.
What I can do is prove that a particular type of God exists, but I do not fully understand.
Okay, let's go through these
Islam, and
one
I
by
don't fully
one.
understand. So I wouldn't be able to prove to you that Islamic God doesn't exist. I agree with you, but I would say,
do you know
in my
that
day-to-day
we
life,
can
I
prove
see
negatives?
suffering. I see suffering, and to me, if I was God, I would argue, and God is meant to be kind. Is that correct?
And just.
Is just.
And wise.
But is a child being born with a disease who is suffering from birth, is that just? I would argue that is not just. A child being born without any decision making,
okay, let's think about this.
ever making any more decision is in suffering. I would say that's not just.
So your reason...
No one should suffer without reason, without cause or justice.
Right.
That is what justice is. Justice is an act and a consequence of that act. That is not the case for a child born with a disease.
Sure.
That is not the case for someone starving.
So let's deal with one by one, right? Okay. Let's deal with the first thing, child suffering. Give me an example of this suffering. What is the child suffering from? Cancer?
I don't think a child can be born with cancer, but I could be born. There are children born with severe disabilities.
Fine, disabilities. Do you know that many of the things could be because of what we do as parents? What we have done to our environment? Why we have done all this external stimulus all around us, and then they make the baby deform in our womb?
Do you have a family? Do you have a family?
Firstly,
I'm responding to your question, so I'm asking you, do you have a family?
I have a family, but let me move on.
If you did something wrong, say you came up and slapped me, yeah? I would agree that's wrong, yeah? And instead of you suffering, your children suffered. That's not just. You should feel the consequences of your action, not your children.
Let's take that
That's
one
not just.
It's not just in your thinking, perhaps. I'll tell you why the thinking is quite out of place. When we know that if someone drinks alcohol in large quantities while she is pregnant, we know the child's going to develop fetal alcoholic syndrome.
That is correct.
Yeah, we know that.
That's correct.
So then you're saying this woman, the mother, the pregnant woman, should suffer, not the baby. But we know that the consequence is going to pass on to the baby.
But that is wrong. That is not
just. Wait. You can't just say, oh, because the child suffers, the child is made to suffer because of the actions of someone else. For example,
does a child suffering because of someone else's actions without any consent? The child does not consent. The child has no decision in that. The child did not say, "Mother, can you drink alcohol?" No, because it was in the womb.
Just relax.
Why is a child being punished like that? Why is a child being treated in such an awful manner because of another person's actions? That is not just.
Did you consent to global warming? Did you consent to air pollution, water pollution? Did you consent to all these harmful X-rays and rays that's coming and causing you cancer? Did you consent to any of that?
Firstly,
for example, here.
Are you going to let me respond to your question?
Yeah, please do. Okay. Did you consent to any of that?
I would firstly say, regarding climate change and anthropogenic climate change, I am part of that.
Did you consent to it?
Yes, because by being part of that, by getting on the train today, I contributed to greater greenhouse gas emissions.
Nope.
By me, yes, I did.
What is consent?
I purchased these
Let's understand from the very root what is consent.
By using oil, I contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. I am consenting because I am part of that action.
What is consent?
When it comes to cancer, I'm not consenting.
Sorry.
I'm not consenting to cancer, but I don't have a choice because I live as in a...
look at that. I don't have a choice. That's the difference between consent and not having a choice.
But no one here thinks cancer
You got
is
it,
just.
finally.
No one here...
Sorry.
Okay, anyone watching who thinks cancer is just? No one thinks cancer is just.
Do you know what you're doing? You're shifting the discussion. Instead of now talking about consent, you're now going to justice. Let's understand consent first. All of the things that you mentioned, ultimately what you're admitting now, I had no choice. I am being forced to live in a system like that. So you did not consent to it, you're forced onto it.
I did not consent to the ability for me to get cancer. But here's
sorry.
the thing.
I'm not talking about cancer.
I was born as an
I don't see why.
And that's how evolution is real. Because it doesn't work very well. It works
harmful,
well, but we have issues.
The harmful
come from different
rays that comes from the sun. or from our universe up
I'm
there.
not saying that's just. I'm saying that is not just.
Sorry. You can't just make it into a just thing only without looking at the system. So now you have ozone layer being hole created in it and
Like
harmful.
human action.
It's the humans doing it, of course. Did you consent to that? Did I consent to it? No, I didn't. I was forced into it. I had
But
no.
collectively, we
Sorry,
did.
sorry,
Our collective
sorry.
action of using
Sorry.
aerosols-
Now you are now totally changing the meaning of the word consent. So now, for example, if a woman is raped because man overpowered her and she had no choice,
That's not the case.
excuse me, let's understand consent. If a woman is being raped by various pervert individuals and they overpower her and she has no choice into that because she's been forced, is that her passive consent to this?
That's not consent.
Is this a passive
She's
consent?
not consenting.
Is this a passive consent? Not an active one. Is this a passive
No, it's
consent?
not.
Good. So if I am being bombarded with all this harmful rays and pollutions all over, am I consenting to this?
Okay, so
Or am I being forced onto it?
when we figure consent,
Do I have a choice or am I consenting?
can I talk?
That's the whole idea.
Okay. When we consider consent, it generally involves multiple people who have the ability to make decisions. We do not consider consent in the circumstances where people don't have the decision process. They don't have control over that. There is no responsibility. When we have consent, there is responsibility and there are consequences to our actions. That is what consent is. That's what we're involving when it comes to consenting. Yeah? So, whereas someone can consent to sex, we don't consent to a catastrophic climate event. We don't consent to that. However,
Do you agree with me?
collectively, for certain catastrophic events, collectively, we have knowingly contributed to that. That is just how the
It's
world
a huge
works.
difference between knowingly being part of the system and actively consenting it.
Sorry, I've got to take a phone call. It just keeps coming through.
You have to be a little bit away if you're going to speak because all cameras going to. Yeah, that's
okay.
fine. Right. So, what we're saying is, we haven't consented for any of this. We had no choice. The baby didn't consent to it. If the baby had the power to consent, I'm sure the baby will say, "Don't drink alcohol, mum, because it's going to harm me."
I agree.
But the
The
baby,
baby isn't consenting.
baby isn't consenting because
100%,
firstly,
we're in agreement. The
yeah.
baby does
So
not consent.
don't
to that.
bring now the whole thing about the baby is suffering.
The baby's not consenting to that. That is correct.
Right.
What
But
I
the
was
baby
saying
is
was
suffering
a
because of
just
what?
System, something that is just is where you do an action and the consequences of your action are felt upon yourself. That is a just system, yeah?
Exactly.
Where you consent, you're consenting to something. I say, if I'm going to go up to someone and swear in their face, I am consenting to their response, whatever that be, because I've taken that action and I'm responsible for whatever they do.
You love
because
to
I've
read.
caused that reaction. A baby has not done that.
Sure.
A baby who was born to a mother had no control over that.
That's what we're saying.
And that is not just. Would a God,
wait.
somebody who's kind,
Just.
somebody who's compassionate, would they create a system where someone who has no choice, who has no ability to consent, who has no responsibility for their action, should feel a serious consequence of
Let's go
somebody's
back to the
action?
system.
I would say no, that is not a just system.
Okay, let's understand
That is an
justice.
unfair
Let's understand
system.
justice. If there is no unjust action, would you understand what just is? If there is no suffering and pain and evil, would you know what good and happiness and bliss and enjoyment is? Would
Is
you?
God all powerful?
Sorry. Don't
Is-
now jump to
No,
justice
to
to
answer
all
your
powerful.
question, to answer your question,
No.
You asked me, do I need relativity to know something?
Firstly, if there was no darkness whatsoever, would you know what light is? Would you even appreciate what light is? Would you? If there was no pain whatsoever, would you even appreciate what happiness and joy is? Would you?
Can you let me respond without interrupting? Okay.
Or if you only respond to the question that I ask?
And to do that, I need to ask you another question.
No. You answer the way you like rather than asking me another
Okay,
question.
alright, then that's fair enough. Okay, what I would say is, we have this system. This is a natural system that it has lots of issues with it. If a God existed, he would, and a God is all powerful. I would argue that if I believed in a God, and I believe this, I could be wrong here, but Islamic God is the all powerful? I think he is. And therefore, if he is all powerful, if he can do whatever he wants, or I'm assuming his gender there, if they can do whatever they want, then I'm sure they could create a system where you do not need relativity to understand something. I don't think it's a big deal. But we live in this system, and therefore...
You've answered your own question. perhaps you haven't realized this. If a creator is all powerful, is the creator able to create with his wisdom systems where people have this relativity to understand and appreciate more?
We do not need to suffer.
No, it's not. You don't need to
God
suffer.
should be able to. If he's all powerful, he should be able
The
to.
creator doesn't want you to
where
suffer.
Suffering doesn't exist.
No.
I'm sorry, but that's simply the fact.
No.
But here's the thing: because we live in a natural universe that is not created by some individual, because it's a reaction and over time, over millennium, little things have big impacts.
Do you want
we have
the
this weird system
creator?
which doesn't always
Okay,
work.
let
This is
me
why we
let
have
me give you
tailbones.
let me
we
give
have
you.
tailbones because we evolved from a monkey with a tail.
Oh, now
That's
you're
why
bringing
we have a
evolution
tailbone,
in.
because it doesn't work. If there was a God, he would have created a system where we wouldn't have tailbones. and therefore we wouldn't have issues.
Now you're
That's why we
resorting
wouldn't have
to
appendicitis.
evolution.
We don't need an appendix. We don't use an appendix. An appendix is a leftover from an evolutionary forefather of us. If
You know why?
If a God
Do you
was
know-
created
do you
that,
know
we
why
wouldn't
I'm
need to have an
surprised?
appendix.
I work in a hospital,
Okay, that's cool.
right? Do you know what an appendix does to our body?
There is
You just made a statement. It's a vestigial organ. Now that was
it
the
has
belief.
No role.
That was the
It has
belief.
no role.
That was the belief about vestigial organs.
Yep.
Like in the Middle Ages, that's how far. I'm not saying Middle Ages in the 14th century, in the early 19th century. They had a list of vestigial organs.
Okay, yeah.
I encourage strongly to everyone who's listening to go and research about vestigial organs, starting from the very first list that was created or generated in the early 19th century. And look at the list. Is the list of vestigial organs means redundant organs in your body? The organs or things in your body that has no purpose. We call them leftover of evolutionary byproducts or whatever, right? Search and do research. Are these lists getting bigger and bigger? Like the more and more part of our body is useless? Or it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller? One thing I can tell you right now, the list is getting smaller and smaller. Why? Because as our science and technology develops, we learn more and more about the function of those things. Appendix was once considered to be a vestigial organ, once considered by our scientists who believed in evolution. But the same scientists will now say, of course, appendix has a major role to play. I am not going to tell you what role is because I want you to do the homework. When I first checked decades ago, so it wasn't actually new information, decades ago, in Scientific American, Ask the Experts, because I used to read Scientific American. There's two news science magazines I used to read during university years. New Scientist and Scientific American. Scientific American had Asked the Experts. And there someone did pose that question. What is the role of the appendix? More than 2 professional scientists in their field answer that question. What role the appendix plays. So today, you would not find, as far as I know, a biology textbook which has this myth, appendix has no role to play. Right. So this is your answer to about vestigial organs. Coming back, look, in Islam, Allah tells us that ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر. The corruption has occurred in the land and the sea. Why? Because what mankind, what their hands have earned. So Allah can, make them feel some of their own chastisement, what they have done with their own hands. Also Allah says that He will test people with something of fear, hunger, loss of life, loss of property, and so on and so forth. So this is part of the wisdom of God creating this life. This life, God, that we believe in, a just God, did not create this as paradise, in which there is no suffering. Yes, I can see. I can see. I know, but I want to quickly answer this. You will go there. I'm not going to take minutes. Maybe a few minutes. This life is not life utopia created by God. It is a transitionary period in which we will be tested in what we believe and what we do.
I understand your position.
And
The thing is,
when we end up in a destination, there will be a place of happiness, there will be no suffering. So God created, for this wisdom from God, God has created this.
To understand the good and the bad.
Do you know why this good and the bad? But at least this point, we have been given freedom of choice, free will. Free will means some people will use it wisely and some people would not.
100%.
Those who would not, they will create suffering. They will do evil. If they were unable to do evil, then they have no free will.
Okay.
Because of the provision of free will, their suffering does exist.
I do understand your position, and I'll be honest, I have heard it before, and I understand the logic of relativity. I would disagree with that, but obviously I've got to go. What I think we both share is the fact that we both agreed earlier that we should try and live our lives respecting others,
Absolutely.
reducing the suffering that our lives have on others. And I think whether you're Islamic, whether you're vegan, or whether you're even Christian or whatever, as long as
not just animal life, right? Human life too.
I consider us all animals, so I agree.
Yeah.
As long as we respect
people in
everyone else,
Palestine, people in China, people in
100%.
Kashmir, wherever people are suffering.